Crime's been a huge issue around this country for some years, and in Victoria in particular, with fire bombings, machete attacks, stolen cars, aggravated burglaries. But is the reaction to it exaggerated? There are some indications that crime figures are dropping a little, a very little. With me is Wayne Gatt, a former operational policeman and Secretary of the Victorian Police Association, and Lex Lasry, a Supreme Court judge for 17 years in Victoria and a couple of years in the Northern Territory. Gentlemen, thank you.
Well,
thanks, Neil.
Wayne, is it exaggerated or not?
I mean, I think the stats don't lie. I think there's an elevated level of crime, and it's quite high at the moment. I don't think anybody's really disputing that. That's not a feature of media reporting. It's a feature of independent statistical analysis. But it's newish. It's new to us. Like, we haven't seen it, I suppose, in these numbers and at these levels in terms of severity before, to be honest. There's
certainly a fear in the community. It's palpable. You talk to people, they're worried about aggravated burglaries and stolen cars, and you can understand why.
I've got it.
You've got it?
I live in the southern suburbs. We've had aggravated burglaries around our place, and I worry about it. And I mean, I'm frightened of the prospect. We've got security to make sure that we diminish the risk.
You got a baseball bat under the bed?
I've wondered about that. That raises a really interesting legal issue.
Well, it does. I do know people who've defended themselves with baseball bats and been charged.
Yeah, well,
they did chase the people.
The simple answer is if you get control of the situation or you're not under immediate threat and you clobber the invader with a baseball bat, you're in trouble.
What about you? Baseball bat?
Well,
you're a big dog.
I think I could defend myself. But like Lex, have I got security? Yeah, of course, because it is a reality of the current day. Like that's what we're dealing with. But I do try to put myself in the mind of some of these innocent victims of crime, and our members all the time have to talk to them as victims, and it's hard for them. Like it is life altering, some of this offending.
Well, for the victims or for your members?
For the victims, but it is altering the careers of police officers. It's fair to say that whether you're on the bench or you're dealing with victims in a more intimate setting at their home, there's a vicarious trauma that comes from dealing in that space. You onboard some of that trauma gradually over time, and I think our members have seen quite an accelerated impact, I think, of those dealings.
Well, Lex, you've sat adjudicating some of the worst murders that have been seen in this country. Do you relate to that? Does that relate to the victim thing?
Yes, of course. I mean, of course, if you're related to someone who's been the victim of a homicide, then it's going to be incredibly traumatic for everybody, particularly if it happens in the home, if it's a domestic relation, whatever. That work didn't give me a complete picture of what's happening in Victoria, because so much of the crime that people are talking about happens outside the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. But yes, I would simply say, in the 17 or so years I was a judge, I detected, and I gave voice to it a couple of times, the level of violence is increasing. In other words, I think I said in one case, I never cease to be amazed at the way men in particular find new ways to do really serious harm to women.
I remember that, but it's like, and I've used the comparison, bad kids used to start off stealing hubcaps, graduate to cars, maybe some shoplifting. Now they seem to go straight to aggravated burglaries and machetes. Is that an exaggeration, do you think, Wayne?
A little bit. I mean, I think what we're seeing is first early offending at more severe levels in some cases. But I'd say this, that I don't think it's true to say that kids just wake up and go, I'm going to commit an aggravated burglary today. I think what we do see is early warning signs that are often missed, and many, many opportunities to intervene in a very positive way that simply aren't taken. And I think that when you peel back the layers of the offending behaviour, you will see a history of lost opportunities with young people. I don't think it's often the case. I'm not saying it never happens. I'm just saying I don't think it's often the case that a young person just suddenly wakes up and says, today's the day, I'll do a carjacking.
No, and I think I think they feel completely disenfranchised, a lot of them. I think they think they've got nothing to hope for because of their circumstances, because of the level of relative poverty that a lot of them live in. This is the way out for them, the way they see it, because it means money in the pocket, excitement, peer group approval, the sorts of things that they otherwise don't get.
Do they have no sense of mortality though? We see kids.
No.
No? They're never going to die.
Nobody, I mean, I'm
age,
now
yeah.
78, Neil, and I talk to people in their 40s and 50s, and I say to them, I know you think I know you're going to die, but you don't believe it. Whereas at my age, you believe it.
What's the youngest child you would have dealt with?
I've had young teenagers. I think I've told you the story before about doing a bail application. It was an appeal from the Children's Court. And I was sitting in the 4th Supreme Court, which is the court where all the big criminal trials happen. All the murders, Ryan and Walker, you name it, all happened in that court. And I walked into court and a diminutive 13-year-old was actually sitting in the dock. And it's a snapshot I've never forgotten. I sat down at the bench and straight away said, get him out of there. I'm not going to have a 13-year-old sitting in the dock in this court. There was no need for that. But it's very sobering when you realise that kids of that, I mean, I remember being 13, although it was a long time ago, I can remember it quite clearly, and it never crossed my mind. I would have been too frightened to do some of the things that 13-year-olds do now. And I think that's pretty...
So you came off the bench and sat at the table?
No, I didn't. I should have. The next time I didn't.
Oh, so you've done that?
Yes, I have done that, but I did make sure that he was not sitting in the dock. I brought him down to the bar table.
And why in other cases, why would you come down and sit at the table with a young offender?
To try to deformalise it a bit. I mean, look, I know for certain that 13 and 14-year-old kids who are offending are not going to be interested in the words of a man in his 70s, a judge. They'll sit there and they might sit there respectfully and listen, but they think it's bullshit, really. They just want to know, when can I go home? What's the number? What's the number of days, weeks, months I have to spend in custody? When am I going to get bail?
It's a bit like the theory that used to exist that the job of a copper was to grab the naughty 13-year-old, give him a boot in the bum and send him home. But what did you say to the kids? What did you achieve by sitting with them? Did you achieve anything? I mean, we're looking for answers. Is this part of it, taking the formality out of the serious?
All I set out to do was to try to make that kid feel a bit more comfortable in the circumstances without really holding out much hope that it would make any difference. As you know, I sort of developed a program of my own in the court, particularly with bail applications and particularly during COVID, where I did a hell of a lot of bail applications. And I decided the only thing I could do that was useful was to say to kids of that age, I'm going to give you bail and then you're coming back here next Friday. And the prosecutor's going to give me a report on how you've been. And if you've not been good, you're back in custody. And then the next Friday, he'd be there. And then the next Friday after that, for as long as I thought it was necessary. And to a degree, I think that worked. At least they felt they were being checked on and supervised.
Has there been a serious study done on that?
No.
Did you have enough cases to?
I had enough cases to know that it seemed to work, but I had a few others where I did it and it didn't.
What about you, Wayne, as a policeman, operational policeman dealing with a kid? How would you react?
Well, I think we've changed. I mean, the reality is it's not 31 years ago when I started out on the streets. You describe it as a kick up the backside and a stern word, perhaps.
Did that happen?
Oh, it used to happen. Of course it did. Does it happen anymore? No. And there might be something in that. Like there is a need sometimes for almost that parental sort of figure, and sometimes it comes from that immediate intervention right at the time. And I think this is the problem with youth offending and the way we deal with kids, is that by virtue of the process, we often get to talk about what's happened months, if not years after the event. That doesn't work with kids. There has to be proximity. And look, to be quite honest, the kick up the bum at the time is the one that does it. I'm not suggesting for a second that that's where we go, but I'm saying that our process takes us on a jolly path of deferral down the road.
Yeah.
That fails.
Meanwhile, they're on bail, probably.
Yeah, the justice system has to work quickly for everybody, especially for kids.
Remember a story about former Assistant Commissioner Frank Green, who became quite a good friend of mine because we were in the Costigan Commission together. And he came into my chambers one day and I had a young barrister, whose name I won't give, but a young of Greek ethnicity. But Frank walked in and recognised him straight away and reminded him that when he was a little kid, he used to be the sort of cockatoo lookout for his father's illegal gambling in Collingwood. And he got the kick up the backside from Frank a few times and they had a really good laugh about it. And it rather underlined the point to me that very often the more local police officer, usually a policeman in those days, was probably a figure of significant respect to kids. They took notice. That was the uniform, that was the police car. When a copper said don't, they took a bit of notice. And I think there's a bit in that.
But I don't think it's just our police. Like, I think our teachers used to have those
Yeah.
roles in our schools, and we see, teachers. And I tend to talk to teachers. I've got a family full of teachers.
So have I, bad luck.
Yeah.
It's rough.
But their hands are tied these days, and I'm sure there are interventions and things they would like to do and say in classrooms and provide greater guidance that they perhaps feel challenged by.
Yeah, I think it's more difficult to take those liberties these days.
Are we angry? Is society more angry at the moment, do you think? You talked, Lex, about seeing increasing violence. Why?
No, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether society is more angry. I mean, within my sphere of activity, I don't see it, but you do see it when you read about the sort of things we've been talking about.
What do your members say, Wayne? Is things more angry out there?
It's more violent. Our experience is that when it goes wrong. So is it more violent? Yes, our members see more violence. They see it against others, but they see it against themselves too. So that's changed. It's more disrespectful. There's no doubt there's less respect between ordinary individuals shown to each other. Now, this isn't just a kids thing. This is parts of our society, community. People care less. They have less gratitude.
Have you noticed a lack of manners on the road too? If you give way to somebody or somebody gives way to you and you wave, like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
But I guess that's a symptom.
Well, say good morning to somebody walking down the street. They sort of look at you like you're crazy, and that it's something that strikes me as odd. Like simple courtesies seem to have escaped us.
Yeah, I've noticed that particularly with women. If I'm walking and there's a young woman walking towards me, or even an older woman, you can understand a young woman wanting to avoid some boomer on the road, but an older woman, and you'll smile and say good morning and head down.
It's almost like we don't know how to react.
Yeah. Or
I think there's a contributor to this, and I don't want to be political, but it probably is political. I think this modern era of grievance politics is making people cross. People are being taught by politicians, particularly on the hard right and even the centre right, that the best way to deal with problems is to be angry about it. And I think it makes people angry just seeing that example. There's a lot less consensus at that level than there ever used to be.
But which came first though? I mean, it's chicken and egg argument. Did the
This is
right
political
wing
opportunity.
Yeah, did the right wing party surge because the anger existed, or did the anger exist because the right wing party surged?
But I think political parties only succeed when there's political difference.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's not okay to be in a grievance. An opposition doesn't succeed by, being, in Victoria's case, by being Labor light. They have to have a point of difference, and if they don't, people drag them in that direction. So we don't have a healthy contest of ideas. I think it turns a lot of people away from political discourse, because I think ordinary people with measured views who might have different views from time to time just want to have a normal debate and find the sensible centre of that debate. But the system drags them in opposing directions, and I think it's failing our society as a whole.
That's a really interesting point. I was going through some of the policies. There's a Victorian election in November. I was going through some of the policies of the opposition. One, and there's some more obvious ones, but one was if you deface a war memorial, you can get 10 years jail. That's not going to happen. You get 5 or 6 is the average for rape. You're not going to lock somebody up, Lex, are you? Get 10 years.
If you're sentencing someone and that's what the Act says you have to do,
no,
that's
this
what you
isn't
have to
mandatory.
do.
This
not mandatory.
This is just a maximum sentence.
Yeah, okay. No, you're not going to get
But there's another argument. They're arguing for mandatory sentences. Now, I know your view on that.
Yeah.
What is it?
Oh, well, I as a retired judge, and I think other judges feel the same way, I just feel insulted by it, because the message in mandatory sentencing is a judge who imposes a sentence based on all the circumstances of the case will not always get it right. Therefore, to cater for the judge doing the right thing by the particular circumstances of the case, we have to tell him or her what the minimum is. It's just interfering with the sentencing discretion. And I just don't think the evidence is there really to support the need for it.
What will happen if it's introduced? Will judges refuse to do it?
We've got it now. I mean, in the Northern Territory, if you preside over a murder trial, particularly a murder trial involving a domestic partner, then the mandatory sentence is life. and the mandatory minimum is 25 years. That's what the Act says.
Well, we've got it here on assaulting an emergency worker as they're doing their job, but nobody's ever copped the full sentence, have they?
Well, it's sometimes hard to unpick because the sentence gets wrapped up in, the number of offences a person might have been charged with. So you have to peel right through a sentencing decision to work out whether it's had any impact on that decision. It's not as clear cut. And I think this is the problem with sentencing, is that it's often misunderstood. And to be fair, it's an area of fierce debate. Lex, you'd have to agree. Sometimes that debate I think is fair, sometimes I think it's unfair. And it comes from a place of often misunderstanding. It's very complex. And to be fair to the judiciary, it's a difficult job they're charged with. They have to be fiercely independent. Their decision making requires that. That is a protection that's afforded the accused, and we all benefit from a system that does that. But the community are stakeholders in the system, not the individual decision. They're active stakeholders because the results of whether the system works or doesn't work absolutely impacts them. So there's always going to be debate and challenge.
That gets to the level of community expectation, and that's the reason the politicians are saying we'll introduce mandatory sentences, because they see sentences they think are too light for a particular offence, and therefore they'll make it mandatory or increase the maximum.
Just increase the maximum. I mean, the one thing I agree with Wayne, there's a lot of misunderstandings, and one misunderstanding is that somehow or other judges set out to impose the lightest sentence possible. That's just absolutely not the case. I've imposed sentences on occasions where I wished I could impose more. I gave the example recently where I imposed a life sentence for murder with no minimum because I was utterly appalled at the violence of the conduct.
Well, there's not much more you can do than that.
No, and other judges would do the same. I mean, we're not sitting there trying to make sure that the accused gets the so-called slap on the wrist.
Well,
we're trying to impose an appropriate sentence.
What about community expectation? How relevant, when you're sitting there deciding on a penalty, is the community expectation?
I don't know what that means, Neil. I don't know how do you measure community expectations? It's a completely amorphous concept. Who knows what that is? How do you gauge it? Is there some data that tells us what community expectations are, or is it the expectations of the tabloid press? I mean, that's really the issue. I just think it's an amorphous concept that doesn't help the argument very much.
I have a slightly different view, and I think there's a general understanding and a desire in the community to see a system work, and I think most people, I actually think most people respect the value of discretion in our courts and the need for that, because one day they might be the accused, right?
Yes.
So that's the reality.
So does that mean you don't support mandatory sentences?
I'm not personally a big fan of it, but I understand, and I don't think. But I actually understand how the judiciary take it as almost offensive. I don't think it's an attack on them as individuals. I think it shows a lack of confidence in the system.
Yes, that's right. I agree with that.
And because I actually think our community do respect the judiciary. They do say harsh things and they're subject to criticism. So are our politicians. In fact, so are our police. We've got thick skins in these jobs. But it shows a lack of confidence in the system. And what they want is a degree of consistency. In some cases where consistency can't be applied because the circumstances are never the same. But they want to understand the principles that get them to that decision. Now, there are some cases, and the ones we hear in the media, are always the ones that perhaps, I'm going to say, don't meet their expectations, the ones that don't go wrong. The problem is we never hear about the ones that go right. And so I think you do have this media skew towards, you hear about all the potholes in the road, you don't hear about all the roads that are well made, if you get my drift. But there are some cases that I have seen and that others have seen, and I think we hear in discourse where people go, that can't be, how is that right? How did we come to a decision where there's no custodial sentence, for example, but the behaviour is at the upper end of impact on a victim? Now, I think that's community expectation, that piece where we say, but there has to be this intersection between trying to make sure it doesn't happen again, and that is considering the accused and mitigation, and this bit that says, But there has to be a sense of justice being felt in the community and a disincentivisation of the crime.
But
It's
Wayne,
hard.
I can tell you the feeling I have outside in Lonsdale Street after a sentence is that in most cases where you are dealing with a case that attracts some publicity, it's never enough. And particularly, there's a sort of a bit of a victim lobby. You always have the same procedure where the family of the victims upset, and understandably upset, go out into Lonsdale Street and they all say the same thing: the justice system has betrayed us, it's not enough. How is 15 years a proper sentence in this case? We wanted more. Sometimes they say life, sometimes they say death.
Yeah, hang on.
So the point I'm trying to make is I think people, because of a misunderstanding of the system, have a genuinely unrealistic expectation. And the other thing which they don't realise is that no matter what the sentence, their loss is never going to be catered for.
Of course.
I agree.
Some of them say
But I
that.
agree with that. Many
Lex,
elements of that.
I take your point too. People coming out of the court, steps of the court, yes, and by the way, I don't like the way that happens, but that's another argument. But that's your fault. That's your fault. You and the judiciary, you should be engaged. Here's an editorial coming. You should be engaging, you should be explaining, you should be demystifying.
But Neil, you've just spent maybe an hour sitting in the court, in a public courtroom, explaining to the accused, speaking in the first person, why the sentence you're imposing is being imposed.
Yeah,
All they have to do is listen.
You're talking to the accused, usually not the victim's family. And with due respect,
No, I've got to take you up on that. I mean, that may have been the case. No longer is that the case. We are obliged to consider victim impact statements and the effect on the victim, and often I will address victims.
not everybody likes victim impact statements, though, in the judiciary.
Well, no, it's a pretty flexible procedure, I think. But no, they're a part of the process, and it's an appropriate part of the process.
Sorry, just to finish this point, I've read a lot of your judgments for various reasons, usually on your advice. And when I've seen light sentences, I've gone and read them and I've understood them. I've read a lot of other judgments. I haven't got a clue what they're going on about. What about getting judges to communicate properly?
Well,
Not all.
No, I take your point about that. I mean, that's a fair point.
Sorry, Wayne, I interrupted.
Oh, I was going to say, it can be hard to ask judges to come out and, as you say, maybe editorialise themselves and then still be seen as independent decision makers. I think that's a complexity in the role.
And I'll get reported to the Judicial Commission if they do that. So
Remember that happening?
I know that's
I
an
do.
experience.
I think that's a complexity of the role. We confront some of that too in our role. There are grey lines that are difficult to navigate. But I have a view, and I think it's a strong view, that the needs and the protection of victims should be a greater consideration, or a strong consideration in the system. And that's not being critical of any individual decision that's taken. But I'm actually buoyed by the government's most recent decision to have the Sentencing Advisory Council look at the Sentencing Act, which is a dog's breakfast. I mean, it's 500 plus pages. It's like a lean-to house in East Brunswick. It's add-on after add-on.
Yeah.
It's hard to read, and I'm used to reading legislation, okay? It's hard to interpret. If we all agree that understanding the system is so important, then simplifying the legislation that guides everybody through that system is important too. And this is a good move. It talks about aligning it with maybe an amorphous feature called community expectation, but checking that act to make sure that decision makers who are bound by what the Act says, they can't operate outside it now, making sure that the Act doesn't misdirect, allows them to operate within a scope that has been tested with the community. I think that's a good thing.
Well, let's explore that. When you were sitting, Lex, what did you have to take into consideration when sentencing?
There's the circumstances of the offence to start with, which can be quite complicated. There's the circumstances of the victim, expressed through the victim impact statements or as outlined by the prosecutor. There's the circumstances, background and everything else of the offender. There's current sentencing practices, so you have to impose a sentence that conforms with current sentencing practices. And I might just say, in my time, and indeed over the journey from the 70s onwards, the sentences in the Supreme Court for homicide cases are very much greater, and I would assert very consistent, because the tariffs, if you can call them that, are pretty clear, but they've gone up over the years.
And why is that? Community expectation?
No, I think I mean, I can think of a few sentences, and I'm not going to identify the judges, even though they're deceased in both cases, where even lawyers shook their head and said, how did he do that? Then it was a he in both cases.
Meaning a lighter sentence.
A really light sentence. And I mean, sentences for homicides that would have been in the low teens in the 70s and 80s are now well into the 20s and beyond, into the 30s.
Does that work?
And
Has it worked?
I
What's
think
the murder rate doing? It doesn't change much.
I don't think it's increased dramatically, Wayne. Has it, the homicide rate?
I don't know, to be honest. I'd have to
Last
look.
time I looked, it was fairly
Yeah,
steady.
it's pretty consistent.
But I do think, you know, and it might be a very simple point, but generally speaking, people that are incarcerated don't commit offences against people that are not incarcerated, I should say, in the broader community, at least for that period. Now, I know that.
So you're talking about community protection.
Yeah, and of course, community protection also has to be concerned with what happens when that person is eventually released, okay?
And that's in the Act. I mean, protection
And
of the
it is.
community is a factor.
But this is my point. Our judges, they do a difficult job, but they are bound by the constraints of the Sentencing Act. And then there's discretion in between that, but they have to play in that space.
That's what I wanted to get into. I mean, sentencing, how important is protection of the community, punishment, rehabilitation?
Oh well,
Are they keys?
They're vitally. I mean, I've sentenced a few. Sentenced Matthew Johnson for the murder of Carl Williams. I sentenced Sean Price. These are men from whom the community is entitled to be protected indefinitely, because they're dangerous men, and that's a significant consideration in those cases.
So with the rewriting of the Act that Wayne's talking about, what would you write in there? What do you think should be added to both of you, I'd ask that?
It's so important for people that are experts to have a view, but for ordinary Victorians to input into this process, because they have to understand it. And when the Act is written, and look, any piece of ledge is hard to read. It wouldn't be legislation if it was easy, right? But it has to be clear, and people need to have some understanding of where the emphasis is, and some control over what that looks like.
I think we all need to understand that the sentencing law that we now impose in the courts in Victoria is the product of probably hundreds of years of the common law to start with. As the law varied the considerations that are relevant to a sentence that was imposed from the days when you'd be taken out and hung, drawn and quartered up to the present. And it's developed, and they've endeavoured in the Sentencing Act, the 1991 Act that we've got at the moment, is in a sense an attempt to codify the common law in relation to sentencing. Now, the common law is complicated, and I would just say I agree that there should be a consultation and a fresh take on the Sentencing Act, but sentencing, because of the nature of the subject matter, will always be difficult and complicated.
But I sense sometimes in the judiciary you don't think the public should have an input. Should the public be consulted? Well, some of your colleagues, but
Of course. But it's got to be informed. I mean, that's my criticism of community expectations.
Yeah. Who decides if it's informed?
Well, it's got to be. There's no good just saying that the sentences are not high enough for rape, for example. They should be higher. I mean, an example that could be better informed by people who've had the experience and the community is the experience of victims. Now, I take Wayne's point. I mean, over the years, you see the way victims of crime are basically shuttled to the back of the courtroom and ignored for a great deal of the process, because as far as the prosecution is concerned, they're just witnesses. And for a long time, no one looked after them at all. You know, rape victims would sit out on the corridor in the old county court and just wait to be called. No one looking after them, no one offering them counselling, no support, whatever. That's changed, but it still needs work. And I understand why victims are so cross about the way they're treated within the system.
One of your predecessors, Greg Davies, writing recently in the Herald Sun in Victoria, said Victoria is like a war zone. He said we need to get on top of this, and he's a former victims commissioner as well, the first in Victoria. We need to get on this by changing the bail laws and increasing sentences.
Well, can I say there's a often misunderstood concept with bail and sentencing, and that bail has a very different purpose. It's not there to punish. It is there to do a very important job, that is to ensure people appear before the courts, but also to protect the community during that period. Sentencing does the other bit, and that is all the things that we've just discussed. I think there have been mistakes made in bail, and I think this will be my view. And but I think we can demonstrate. There have been shifts in bail, it's moved up and down, and I've said this publicly before, it's a constant yo-yo. And I think yo-yoing legislation, so legislation that constantly tightens and weakens, is very problematic in our justice system.
Why?
Because inconsistency is deeply problematic for us. It drives poor behaviour.
So what, the message is getting through to the crooks? Oh, the bail, I can get bail easily, or the kids?
Well, it does, and my members have sat opposite from young people who have said, mate, I'll be out before your shift is finished, and they're right. And they're right. Now, what I will say is what we've seen in the recent tightening of bail is a direct correlation with a reduction in crime. So we saw in the first quarter a 0.2% decrease. In the next quarter, we'll likely see a 2.4% decrease. And in the categories of crime that are most worrying to us, what is that telling us? It's a relatively smaller number of offenders that are recidivists, they're repeat offenders. You take them out of circulation, whether that's good or bad in the long term is a different question. But if you take them out of circulation for that period of time, the crime will drop. So that is the community interest being served in that circumstance there, and I think that's important.
And this happens with the young offender as well as the older, because I notice adult crime's up significantly. Juvenile crime's down.
It is
6%, adult crime's up 10%.
It is, but to be fair, we're seeing a greater impact in youth offending in the bail space. And whether that's because young people don't understand the parameters, and I mean, look, it's interesting, Lex talks about coming back and having a young person come back. What a fantastic idea. Resource hungry? Absolutely. Is it practical? I don't know. Is this something we should talk about?
But nobody's looked at it.
I mean, I think the law is still strongly allergic to the concept of 12 and 13-year-olds being incarcerated for extended periods of time. And I think one of the community misunderstandings is a lot of people in the community think bail is somehow part of sentencing. You're not bail refused because you're being sentenced. You're bail refused because a court decides that you are a threat to the community or that you won't attend at your trial.
I think the community gets a bit annoyed by it too, because and there's been some high-profile cases. There was one young offender bailed 50 times and kept offending, and there was a case recently. 4 kids between 12 and 16 charged over the death of a shopkeeper.
And Neil, I get that.
And they were on bail.
So I'm equally offended by I'm a dad, and I've got a 14-year-old at home. He could make mistakes. He's got a young mind. I've had 2 other boys, and I've been a young person too. So
what did you do?
Nothing that I'd admit to on a podcast.
As your lawyer, I would suggest you not answer that.
I think that's very good advice. But can I say that I think most police would be really uncomfortable when we see young people in courts, and we get really uncomfortable when we see the prospect of bail having to be refused. But here's the thing: if we know or we suspect that it's highly likely that a decision that allows bail or grants bail, releases somebody into the community, is going to see another victim the next day, and in many of these cases, it is a matter of hours that we see reoffending, serious reoffending, right? As much as we don't like seeing young people in that circumstance, we have to take the community interest or give it greater weight.
I think, and I've said it myself, I've done cases where that I've looked at bail applications by young people, particularly during that COVID period, and I've just said, look, there's a dozen reasons why you should be released on bail, but I just have no optimism that you won't leave this court and commit further offences. And indeed, I've revoked bail in circumstances where someone has gone out having been released on bail and committed an offence that day. I mean, and you get the sense of how it's going from the material that's put before you, and there are times when you just can't release them.
So what's uppermost in your mind when you're dealing with a bail application? Is it the danger of reoffending and the danger of skipping the country?
If it's a child, you mean? If it's
of the younger one, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's uppermost in my mind that I am personally affronted by the idea of young teenagers being locked up. But community protection from that person, if the odds are they're going to commit a further offence and really pay no attention to what happens in the bail proceeding, is also significant. So that's why I tried bringing them back, and by and large it worked. But the other thing, Neil, is that we are resource poor when it comes to this stuff. I mean, if Wayne talks about young people being locked up, bail refused, often it'll be in a police cell, in a police station. And I mean, that's no place for a 12 or 13-year-old. And we just don't have, and you know, the establishments that are designed to cater for youth offenders are really under-resourced, I think.
I did read a figure the other day, which I haven't checked through, that 85% of young offenders had, in the previous 10 years, had some dealings with child protection or child services.
Does that surprise you? Like, I don't know if that figure's correct, but it wouldn't. That goes to my point earlier about I don't think anybody just wakes up and says, "Well, today's the day I'll do an aggravated burglary." Okay.
But it says the system's not working. If 85% of them have been through some sort of supervision.
I think what it says is we don't invest enough in the broader system. So people think that the system is the courts and the police. Well, we are two parts of the system. The system is much bigger than us. The people that should be caring for, that need to care for, that need to support, respond to situations where kids start to experience challenges and problems are not resourced to the degree that they should. When we have young people who sadly find time incarcerated, do we invest sufficiently in them when they're released? Do we invest in them when they're in youth justice centres? Because this is where the money needs to be spent.
That's right.
We can spend it all day and all night on police. We can, to some extent, we have to spend it on the courts because we need to shorten the time it takes for people to get from A to B. That's in the interests of victims. It's in the interests of young people. But we should be spending money earlier, much earlier.
And it saves money. I mean, the cost of keeping a young person in custody is very significant. The sort of the proper diversion resources will save the community money.
A lot of people listening to this now, with the mood there is, I think, and we discussed the mood in the community, they'll say, "Oh yeah, you want to go and give them a cuddle. Give them a cuddle and let them out again."
No one said that. No. You'll never get that from me. There are young people out there today committing really serious offences that need to be punished. That is the reality. We talk about the C word, consequences. Yeah, and absolutely, I think in certain circumstances we've been slow to provide those consequences, and the absence of those consequences have meant that others haven't felt the guide rails, and kids need guide rails. I mean, I know that as a dad. If you don't provide guide rails, if there aren't consequences, then your kids don't make decisions. Now, will they always make the right one just because there's a consequence? No, but those guide rails, I think, help them make better ones. It's not about cuddles. It's about recognising that there are contributing factors. And if you don't address those, then you will have to punish.
And it's about proper professional resources that actually get involved with young offenders and divert them away from what they've been doing. It's not a cuddle, it's someone who knows what they're doing to basically assist a young offender to develop in the right direction.
And we're not doing that.
We're not doing enough of it.
No.
I mean, there's some, but there's nowhere near enough. I mean, the figures prove it.
I can tell you a common complaint of my members, Neil, will be that at 5 o'clock, everyone else in the system goes home. And the police are the only ones until 9 o'clock the next morning. And that's when all the work's done, and that's when the need is there in the community, and the resources are so short.
Pat McGorry is just former Australian of the Year, has just written an article about the failure of the resources for mental health in Victoria, and that's part of it.
If I got this correct, that I seem to remember a message from you, from the bench, about somebody who required, whether it was youth care or some sort of care or psychiatric care, and it wasn't available. Do you recall that case?
Oh, there's been a number of cases.
So what, you say, I want them to go off and do this? And
I think probably what you're referring to are cases where someone, for example, has been found not guilty of murder on the basis of mental impairment. And so you are required to make a custodial supervision order, the idea being that that person will go to Thomas Hembling and be treated for the illness they're suffering from. But 12 or 18 months or more may go by before a bed can be found for them to be there.
And they're in the prison system.
They're in the mainstream prison system.
And they're sick.
And they're not guilty. I mean,
they're not guilty.
You say, well, of course they're guilty, but that's a genuine acquittal because they're mentally impaired.
It is a sad reality, though, that in some cases, when a person is in custody, it is the first opportunity they have for an intervention. Now, whether that's a mental health one or a social one, in today's paper, there's a young man on the in the paper talking about his period of incarceration, as difficult as it was for him, being a period of intervention, that has been life-changing for him. Now, we hear all the bad impacts of incarceration, and I think that is true. But then there are some people who just simply need to be taken out of circulation for a period of time and given an opportunity. Now, if the opportunities provided are valuable, if we invest in them during those periods, I personally think they have more hope than just simply letting them go and hoping it doesn't happen again tomorrow.
And the system's not doing that.
I don't think
properly.
it's doing that in a planned or constructive way.
Talking about the problems with bail and to a lesser degree sentencing, do you think it is, Lex, eroding public confidence in the system, the police and the court system?
I think if there are a large number of cases where people are being released on bail and almost immediately reoffend, then of course that's eroding confidence in the system, because the system is meant to prevent that. And the imposition of, or the grant of bail carries with it conditions, and of course the first condition in every grant of bail is that you're not committing further offence, and if straight away you commit one, it's not hard to see why the community will think that the system is not working.
Is it undermining police?
Well, if police are the people granting the bail, then it does, because police can be bail decision makers too. So we're open to the same criticism. But I think in circumstances where a person is granted bail, that doesn't matter who by, and if they reoffend in a similar way and the system just goes on repeat and grants bail again, well, I accept that's going to cause in the community dissatisfaction, but also a lack of confidence. And I think in those cases it's absolutely warranted. I personally don't think bail can be a never-ending elastic band that keeps stretching. It can't. A senior sergeant once said to me something that I have, very early in my career, that I have taken with me. And he said, "I've noticed, Wayne, that you've pulled over a lot of cars and you've spoken to a lot of motorists." And I said, "That's great, boss." And I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, every one of them has received a warning." And I said, "And what's the problem with that?" And he said, "Well, if you only ever give warnings, your words will have no meaning." He's right. There is a time and a place for warning, for tolerance, for chances and second chances, but there's a time when that has to run out or the system just erodes and breaks down.
As we sit here now, I don't know how many magistrates' courts, county courts and Supreme Courts are currently sitting, but in most of those courts there are bail applications being made and decisions being made. So it's probably on a daily basis hundreds if not thousands. And that system continues and functions properly. What we hear about, of course, are the ones where there's a sensational reason to report a breach of bail by someone who immediately commits another offence.
Crime, yeah.
It's a fraction of the number.
Well, the opposition here in Victoria is promising a policy, one strike. So you're given bail, you break bail, you're in. That work?
No, of course it won't work. It's just a version of mandatory sentencing. It's a political solution to a problem that's not a political problem. You've got to deal with the case on the individual. I mean, I've had bail applications where there have been one or two previous breaches of bail, and the seriousness of the breach varies from circumstance to circumstance. You just can't make those sort of global statements, and that is again the potential government at least saying we don't trust judges and magistrates, or even police sergeants who are empowered to grant bail.
Wayne?
I go back to it's about confidence. I don't think it's about the individual judges. But I do think it's about confidence in the system. I think what they're responding to is a period where we saw the system, so the law, relax bail laws in Victoria. So coming out of the Coghlan review, tightened, and then we saw it relaxed, and then we've seen it retightened. I think that's policy that responds to that period of loosening, but it's a period that had significant and severe consequences for the community. It did see reoffending increase, particularly in that youth space. Look, I suppose I'm comfortable with governments talking about the issues, talking about and representing what the community are talking about. I think that's a part of the system. I do think the discussions around bail have to be nuanced, but it can't be an endless catch and release scenario either. There has to be tolerances.
My concern with governments, any governments of any colour, anywhere in the country, talking about these things and addressing these things, is that they're usually not concerned about doing what will improve things. They're concerned about being seen to do what will improve things. In other words, they're politically motivated, not result motivated. And therefore we get some of these policies which to me seem...
But political motivation in politics is the system working in some regards. I liken it to this. There's an electoral office where I live. I knock on their door and I talk to my local member who takes those views to the parliament, who debates those views and then sets the laws. There's a direct connection with our community and what they think and expect with the laws that are set and the way that they're interpreted by agencies like the court. That, I say, is as the system is designed to work. So I don't take the view that politicisation of the way our laws are constructed is entirely bad. That is, I say, how community expectations are actually reflected. But in that, there are checks and balances. There's the debate of both houses of parliament. There's opposing views in that, and then there's things like the Human Rights Charter and other overlays that ultimately, I hope, get you to the right result.
We've been talking about how bail, whether they get bail or not, can impress particularly on kids the importance of the situation they're in. Lex, does the same apply to sentences? If you commit an offence and you know that the maximum is 10 years.
Well, when you're committing the offence, you know what the penalty is?
Well, that's the question. They don't, do they?
No, of course they don't.
No.
I mean, they
don't think they're going to get caught.
There's a real argument to be had about the benefits of general deterrence, which is that's the sentencing concept that says you impose a sentence, a heavier sentence, in order to deter others from committing the offence. I mean, I think I was restrained from saying this when I was a serving judge, but after the experience I've had, just don't believe it. I just don't think it works. I don't think anyone who's about to commit an offence has a quick look at the Crimes Act to see what the penalty is before they commit the offence.
So you don't think deterrent works, therefore you don't think harsh sentences?
It does in some circumstances. I mean, the best example, Wayne was talking about motorists. I think general deterrence is very effective in traffic offences, and everyone's frightened of being pulled over by the cops because there's a consequence, and so people drive accordingly. Well, some people do, some people don't, but most people do. But look, in crimes of violence and crimes of passion, there's no role for general deterrence in the mind of the offender.
Just to explain what you mean by no, you mean that having a tougher sentence doesn't deter those serious criminals?
No. I mean, my favourite example, which is not topical in Victoria, is all the research that's been done on the death penalty in countries where it exists, including Singapore, which is one of my pet hates. It does not deter. The figures, the recidivism rate shows that having a death penalty doesn't stop people committing the offence, because in that case, people just don't believe they're going to be caught.
We'd never go back to capital punishment, would we?
I hope not. You can get it wrong, and I think around the world it's been shown to get it wrong. But I also understand there are offences committed in the community that rock you to your core. I never forget the murder in 2012 of Jilmar, and my personal reaction to that as I sat on the couch and watched the news, and that's never left me. It got me out of my seat yelling at the TV. Okay.
Why? Because the system failed?
Because it was almost foreseeable in my mind that somebody who perhaps shouldn't have been on parole at that time was almost certainly going to find a situation where, we've given their history and given what they had done whilst they were given that privilege of being on parole, had already started to re-offend. And so I say that, I think sometimes penalties have work to do. I don't, Lex, I agree. I don't think people go, well, this one's 25, right. So that'll be the thing. But I do think they know that murder carries a significant penalty, right? I do think they understand.
Oh, yes.
They understand that there are crimes that have a degree of severity.
But they'll contemplate it afterwards.
More so.
The body is still warm. The police have arrived. They're in custody, charged with killing that person, and then they reflect on it just for a little while and suddenly think, I'm in real trouble here.
But there's another element there. How many murders that you've have judged have actually been premeditated?
Oh, well, some have.
Some have, yeah. The person premeditating is aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, and in some cases they just don't care what the consequence is.
Oh, the one you mentioned earlier, the Carl Williams case.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was always going to kill Carl Williams. How Carl Williams wound up in that holding area at Barwon Prison with him is still a mystery to me. But Matty Johnson wouldn't have cared.
In jail for life,
Yeah.
never to be released.
I think the prospects of him being released are pretty close to zero. I agree with you about the Gilmar case. I remember how upset the ABC people were about
What's your
that.
staff member?
But the thing that struck me about, if there's ever a silver lining about anything, in that case it was the police work that was done to reveal the offender. There's a great story which I won't try to retell, but how they ultimately, because I knew the policeman who interviewed, was his name Wayne, the guy who committed the offence?
Bailey.
That's right, Adrian Bailey.
Adrian Ernest Bailey.
And that moment when he informed him, I think during the interview, that they had found the SIM card out of Gilmar's phone, which was in his jeans pocket in his washing machine. I think that's how it worked.
It was superb police work.
It was magnificent police work.
There was, and I do remember it was very deeply impacting for me. But
Why? Because it was frustration? What was it?
Because it just brought up such an anger, a frustration that it shouldn't have happened. Like, she was so innocent. You work in a job where you try to stop that stuff from happening every day, and when you watch it unfold in front of you, you go, how? But the one thing, and I can picture it in now, at Sydney Road, Brunswick, hundreds walking down that street. Now, I know that we struggle and we might differ in terms of what community expectations look like. That's it. That's community expectations. That's a community saying to you, you got it wrong. We deserve better.
And I would add, and probably Wayne will agree with this, and it's a thing that I've thought about a lot over the years, this developing tendency of men to increase the level of violence against women, to treat women with entitlement, which is what that was. He saw her in the street, saw that she was struggling from probably having a bit too much to drink, and decided, I'll have that, and just took it.
Why is that happening?
Well, I think this
why
is
are men-
almost as old as time, and I think it's getting worse. I think men's attitude to women, the manosphere as it's now called on social media, to me that's frightening.
How do you feel as a member of the judiciary? It must be traumatising for you as well. If you've let somebody out on parole, on bail, or the parole board in that case, and they commit a serious offence.
Well, there was a huge fuss about the parole board and why he was released on parole.
Yeah, but if you release somebody on bail and they go out and commit a serious offence,
you feel immediately. I haven't had that happen, but I imagine the feeling is one of instant regret, dramatic regret.
You said recently, Lex, that in a speech that you were glad your career is over. Why?
I look back on my career now and I genuinely wish I'd done something else. And I've said that a couple of times. And
Why?
Because I just think I got to the stage where I struggled with the fact that day in, day out, what I was about was dealing with human turmoil, conflict and tragedy. And that's what we all do. Wayne's sitting here, so, I told you the story about having failed a couple of subjects at the end of third year at university and being told by the dean that I probably wouldn't get through the rest of the course, and going from there to the Brighton Police Station to get the papers to join up. And my mother intervened. My mother intervened and said, out of the question. I mean, this was 1970 odd.
But depending on what he did, that could have been even worse.
If I can relive this life, which I know I can't, I'd like to do something
What would it
positive. Oh, it'd be something probably arty, farty music or something like that. I wouldn't want to do it again.
But you love being in court.
Yes, I like the theatre of the courtroom. That's true. I did. I liked it. That's why I did what I did. But there are cynical lawyers who say the worst part about being a defence barrister are the clients. And you can have a lot of fun without the clients, but you've got to take the client's wishes into account when you're running the case.
So, Lex, what was it? Was this sort of conveyor belt of misery, of violence, of awful things?
Look, it was
that got you?
It's a job I wasn't particularly well suited to. I knew that from the outset, and I struggled in the early days at the bar. And most of it was a struggle for me. I didn't take naturally to it. I found it stressful because of the sort of person I am. There are plenty of barristers who took to it like ducks to water and had an ego that helped them along the way. that really, I don't think that was me. And as a judge, I liked being a judge. I loved the Supreme Court, apart from at the very end. But you know, it's sort of negative. It's all really negative work. You are constantly dealing with, as I say, with people's disputes or people's tragedies. And in the criminal division, you know, it's homicidal tragedies. Now I'm sitting next to Wayne. I told you the story, and I think compared with judges and magistrates and barristers in the criminal law anyway, being a police officer has all sorts of positives. I once did a coroner's inquest where it involved the police search and rescue squad, and I thought watching them playing with their toys and travelling around the mountains and helping people, I thought, yeah, that'd be good.
Wayne, do you wish you'd done something else?
I do, and it's interesting listening to that reflection. I always say I wish I became a vet. I joined the police force, ended up in 2 stints working with dogs and horses and fighting crime on or with animals. And but look, it's easy to look back and go, oh, everything I did in my career was difficult. Nobody that's gone in the gates of the academy, in my view, has come out the same way that they went in. I think it changes you.
Yeah.
And I think it hardens you, and I think it alters the way you look at your family, look at your life. Now, I regret bits of that. I'm a harder person sometimes. I'm a bit more cynical a lot of the time. But I've had the privilege of being able to help people, and so have you, Lex, too, if you reflect on it, to be fair. You know what? We're fortunate to have had jobs that allow us to do that for other people, because I think in time you get to think back and go, well, but for those interventions, you know, is our community better? I hope so.
I don't know.
Well, I'm the only one who enjoyed my career.
Well, and rightly so, Neil. Rightly so.
Okay, how do we fix it? Where do we start? What do we do? I think we've explained and identified and we've drilled into the problems. You're in charge, Wayne. What would you do?
I think we have to look at where we spend our money in Victoria. I think there needs to be a dramatic analysis about, you know, when we talk about the justice system, are we putting enough in the front end? Are we leaving it all up to 2 agencies, the courts, the police, to deal with what is effectively the aftermath of the issue? And I think we have to rethink the prevention piece and really hyper-invest in that. We can fix this. This is not the current offending that we're seeing in Victoria is not a status normal. It is a status now.
Not the new normal.
If we don't change, it will be.
But we talked about it getting worse over the years.
Yeah, things change over the years, but we can change too. I mean, Lex talked about how the laws have been codified and recodified and they change. Yeah, we used to execute people in the past, we don't anymore. We can change the way we approach our crime problems of today with a different approach for tomorrow. We don't have to accept that it's just going to keep getting worse.
Lex, what would you do?
Oh, well, I agree with the resourcing point that Wayne makes, and from my point of view, the point I take from you, Neil, is that I think courts, heads of jurisdiction and other judges willing to do it should be more in the public discussion explaining the work of the courts. I think there's a role for particularly the Chief Justice, Chief Judge and Chief Magistrate to be regularly in the media explaining whatever the topic of the day is. And explaining...
Any legal reason they can't do that? I mean, obviously they're not going to get there and talk about a trial that's underway.
No, there's no reason. It's just that we lawyers, we are very reluctant.
I've had several in those positions over the years, and I've met with others, including the Chief Justice and at the time and others. And lovely people, get on well, get them in front of a microphone and they go and clam up. They don't communicate.
I mean, there are John Doyle in South Australia, Chief Justice, he did it for a while, and I think the Chief Justice in Western Australia has done it a few times. But we need for the courts to find a better way to explain their work to the community so that the points that are made about community expectations, whatever that means, I'm still cynical about it, whatever it means, at least we'll be informed by some worthwhile knowledge. Knowledge
Builds better discussions. If people are more informed, they'll still have opinions, they'll still have views, but there'll be better ones. And you'll still have to change systems. They'll still have to change over time, but they'll change for the better, not for the worse. And I think that's, for me, that's a take home.
Okay, a final message from both of you to those people who are frightened. And we started off talking about this. Going to bed with a baseball bat under the bed, or watching the car behind them, or being, and some of the garbage that retail workers have put up with. And, you know, you go into a shop and there's a sign saying, be respectful, for heaven's sake. Is there a reason for these people to have hope that this is not the new normal, that we're going to get it together? Is there any hope there, Wayne?
I think so. You know, I always had this view. The system is not owned by courts. It's not owned by police. It's not owned by politicians. It's owned by everybody. They have to have a view. They have to have skin in the game, and their feelings and the way they feel about where things are going absolutely matters. They have to make sure that they're not silent passengers in Victoria's trajectory, that they input into the political process, that they have their say, that they communicate what matters, and they're less apathetic. Like in Australia, we are apathetic politically compared to other countries. And I think that's a failing. I think we have to have views, encourage those views in that debate, and then better decisions are made by our politicians, by everybody that works within the system.
Lex?
Well, we started out talking about my concern about offending in my area. I must say I'm very comforted by the fact that I don't live far from the Bayside Police Complex. So that's the first thing. The police presence. Police presence in the community, I think, is very important, and increasing the number of visible police presence, I think, is probably a priority. Just generally, I'm not talking about particular parts of offending, but just across the community. I think people feel better when they can see that the police are actually looking after them and policing their area. To people who are disaffected with the justice system, I would say, from my experience, every judge and every magistrate that I know, despite what they might think, is genuinely working their butts off to do their job properly and to protect the community within the constraints of the law that applies to them. There are no judges or magistrates who are indifferent or flippant about community protection. They are well aware of the needs for protection and probably well aware, despite my criticism of the concept, of a level of community expectation.
Courts clogged?
Yeah, I think the lower courts particularly. I mean, the county court now has a backlog, which is, I think, pretty unacceptable, and the magistrates' court, I think, is pretty chaotic just with the sheer volume of work.
So that gets to Wayne's point of spending where you need to.
Yes,
clogged
absolutely.
courts, more coppers,
Yeah.
better rehab, better intervention.
Yeah.
We solved it?
No.
Not yet.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.